Hello everyone, welcome back to another Empathy Week webinar series. Today I'm delighted to have actually a close friend of mine now, Mimi Nicklin, who is leading the conversation around empathy in the business world. She's an experienced marketer, strategist, and talks all things empathy. As you can see behind her, I brought it along, but actually we don't need it because it's sat behind her. But her book, best-selling book, Softening the Edge, which we will definitely be talking about, all about how empathetic leadership can be used in the business world. And I'm really excited because we've been talking so far about kind of education and very much empathy in different fields, but we haven't particularly talked about empathy too much in actually transforming a business and transforming, I believe it's an advertising agency and work that Mimi's been doing. So welcome, Mimi.
Thank you. I mean, what an honor, Ed, to be here right after Empathy Week's finished. And it's such an important time for the conversation. So thank you so much for having me.
No, not at all. And absolutely, let's just kick off there as the title of, I asked you, what do you want to speak about? And you came back with, why is empathy Forbes word of the year? Firstly, who are Forbes? Because some people won't know who Forbes are. And secondly, why do you think they've highlighted it as the word of the year?
Yeah, absolutely. So Forbes is a really huge media platform, basically. They have a presence over all kinds of different platforms, whether that's audio or visual or the news. I think they're the largest global business media brand in the world. So they have this huge scale and they talk about different news stories. They talk about entrepreneurs and leadership, what's driving change, what's transforming business, what's impacting the world, basically, what's making a significant sort of difference to our world. And they back in November now wrote a piece and said that empathy should be one of the words, of the year for 2021. Because the world depends on it. I think Forbes, being a predominantly American, although they have outlets all around the world, as I said, news publication or business platform, obviously that was coming very closely off the back of the American election. And Joe Biden, who won the American election, his whole platform was all around unity and empathy. So the conversation jumped up a significant notch at the back end of 2020 due to the political and just the world reality, COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, just all of this social turmoil that's going on. And there were some really big brands saying that this is the time for empathy. This is the time that as human beings, we need to get together and have this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, how important is it for, when Joe Biden came out, empathy was the word, the biggest word on the screens. How important is it for political leaders, business leaders, school leaders, yourself as a leader, to put empathy at the forefront? Why is it so important?
I mean, I can't really think of anything more important than being connected human beings. We share a planet, whether that's in a micro scale, it's an office, it's a school, it's a classroom, or it's your home. You are sharing your world with other people. We are, as human beings, meant to be together. We are pack animals. We're tribal at our cores. We grew in tribes when you look back hundreds of years ago. This is evolutionary. So as human beings, our basic need is to be seen and to be heard, to be connected to others. We're not meant to be alone. We don't do well alone. And there's plenty of data and experiments that show that, both on babies and children, but all the way through to adulthood, that when we are isolated, when we are not understood, when we are disconnected, it makes us sick, it makes us unhappy, and it means we can't study well or do our jobs well. So as I said, I don't think there could be anything more important right now or ever than us as human beings connected to those around us.
And empathy, you and I have been on a few courses together and things like that, and you obviously know Lena and Catherine as well, and other people in the empathy space. And lots of people have varying different definitions, of empathy. What is yours and why?
So I would, I mean, as you're right, there's many types of empathy, but I would vastly sort of in a big scale point of view, I would define empathy as perspective taking, as the ability to stand in the shoes of someone else and see the world as they do, understand their context, understand where they're coming from. Now, of course, empathy is also made up of other areas, how we feel. So feeling as others feel. But in my work, I tend to focus on the perspective taking element because from my belief, we have a huge way to go in terms of getting the world to understand what empathy is. And it can be quite a complex area to unpack. So I think if we can at least focus on that, the ability to understand someone else's perspective, to see the world as they do, we're far, far further along than we were before we did that.
It sounds so easy when you say it, but in reality, it's really, really hard, right? It takes a bit of sacrifice on the person that's trying to empathize. It takes sacrifice on their end because you have to listen, you have to be, still, you have to observe body language, and it takes time. Let's talk about you. Firstly, well, you've lived in multiple, I'm not even going to say countries, continents across the world through your working life. How has that played a role in you becoming more empathic and you being more focused on empathy? Because I'm sure, travel, as a lot of people say, which we can't really do at the moment, but it opens your eyes to different cultures, different beliefs. How has that played a role in your development?
Thank you. It's a great question. And I want to comment just to set that answer up on what you just said about it takes a lot of energy and time, which of course it does. But two things I want to say on that. Number one, is there anything in life that's worthwhile that doesn't take some time? And number two, because empathy is a skill set, the more you do it, the easier it gets. So I always like to encourage people that this isn't sort of a time and energy burden forever. The more you practice empathy, the more you get used to empathizing with others and looking out for body language and hearing their opinions, the easier that gets. And perhaps that is one of the things I've learned from traveling around the world, which is that if you are open to the understanding that we're all far more alike than we are different, there is nothing between us. So we may look different, we may dress different, we may believe in different things and eat different things and celebrate different days in the year. But fundamentally, we're all human beings. And when you uncover or unpack all of those, what seem like differences, but really they're just shades of gray. They're just things that make us appear or follow different strategies in our lives. We're just human beings. So that young lady from Turkey or Saudi Arabia or Jakarta is exactly the same as you. She's just grown up in a different context. But as human beings, we're all the same. And perhaps that is what my travels have taught me. And also just to understand that there are communities that do this far more naturally. So we call them collectivist societies, environments or groups of people who live as groups more naturally, more instinctively. Then we have individualistic societies like the UK or America or most of Europe, where we tend to have much more sort of self-centered or niche-centered, so small groups. And what I've learned is that when you are in the more collectivist society, so parts of Asia, China, India, Africa, they know how to empathize more instinctively than perhaps we do in other parts of the world.
Yeah, and there's definitely a sense of, I think my experience is maybe in India, for example, where families actually almost overlap. So you're expected to almost live with your parents, even when you're married, and this idea of culture and togetherness, and the income isn't your income, it's the income of the family, and you're expected to put into that pot of money that supports the community. Really interesting. What I want to kind of delve in a little bit more about maybe a time when a time that sticks out in your memory that is when you've witnessed empathy at its absolute best, and maybe when you weren't expecting it as well. Can you think of a time when that happened?
Gosh, I think there's probably so many. For as much negative media out there that there is, I think there's sort of beautiful moments of empathic understanding happening all around us all the time. Actually, I will default to children, because just this week, I have a little girl, she's 3. Just this week, about 2 days ago in the park, her little friend, who's also 3, a little boy, he fell and he hurt his knee. I mean, not terribly, but enough to put a big plaster on it, and he had to sit down for a while. And my little girl stopped playing. Now, she, as every 3-year-old, she loves to play. And they were right on the edge of the park. Okay, so the distractions were like 1 meter from her. Swings, it's sand based, so sand toys, shovels and all that stuff, and seesaws, and hundreds of children, because it's after school, so this park is full of children. So the natural inclination to go and play was 1 meter away. But she didn't, Ed. She sat with him probably for 25 minutes. She's a talker, my little girl. Probably that's because she's my little girl. But she sat and spoke to him. I've got videos of it, talking about his knee and, what we do when we are sore. And, she didn't leave him. She just sat with him and understood that if he couldn't play, it would be nice for her to stay with him, and she wouldn't play either. So yes, it was amazing, because they're very little. And this plays totally into what you and I often talk about, which is that we're born with empathy. We know how to do this. We forget. Time gets in the way, stress gets in the way, life gets in the way. But innately as humans, we know how to understand each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the question that you get asked and I get asked is, are we born with empathy? Can we develop it? And, it's actually, it's both. You can develop it, but we are also born with it. And it's like you say, it's an innate response, and it's part of our development. And thank God it is, because we need it at the moment. But I also think that the world is a great place, despite all the media that we see. And I do think the media turns more negative on stories, and that's what gets reads and attention, because our brain is wired to pick up on negative information more. How can other people develop empathy? How can you actually go, right, okay, brilliant? Because this is also the problem when talking about empathy, is people think it's this soft thing, it's, you either have it or you don't. And I can't really, where do I even start with trying to become more empathic? What would you say?
I think the great thing about empathy is that the minute you decide to do it, you will. So the way that the brain is wired, the way that our brain works, is that when you send instructions to activate certain parts of the brain, in this case, it's called the prefrontal cortex. When you send that instruction to your brain, it will use it. That's how we do it, right? Most of those actions in the day are subconscious. I mean, breathing, for example, you don't have to think, in most cases, unless you're unwell, you don't have to think about breathing, because you're sending those instructions and your brain makes that happen. Empathy is the same, in that once you send that instruction, that awareness, I want to be more empathic, I want to understand, I want to activate the skill set, you're already a long way along the road. So that's why, for me, I don't ever talk about teaching or coaching empathy. I talk about inspiring empathy, because I think that really that's what the world needs. We need to be inspired to use it more often. We need to be inspired as to the benefits. And as you said, I don't at all see this as a soft skill, which you're right, it's flown around in the world as that, for 2 reasons. Number one, it's quite hard to master on an ongoing basis, certainly in an organization or in a classroom, to really get that embedded. That's quite hard, that you've got to, work on that. And number two, it's quite sadly hard to find. It's hard to find as much empathy as we want. And that's why you and I do what we do. That's why we have passions and jobs that lead us to do this. So yes, I mean, I would say the first thing is awareness. Of course, there are a whole load of skills that can be taught, which you do and I do, and Empathy Week does. But really the first step is the inspiration and the awareness to make the change.
Yeah, it's a great place to start. Just actually saying to yourself you're going to do it, and then actually trying and going out and doing it. And talking about inspiring empathic change, your book is here. I've got it here, Softening the Edge. You talk about your experiences being in Dubai and in the agency that you were in. Can you talk us through that, like from joining the organization to then where it is now, and how empathy's had that role to play?
Absolutely, and it rolls perfectly from that last question, because it was very much an awareness, a decisive choice in my life. So I took a role. I've been in advertising agencies all my career, 15 years, all around the world. I took a job here in Dubai, which is where I'm talking from today. And when I got to that job, I was quite surprised at how much turnaround, how much building that business needed in order to be successful. And safe to say, I was very overwhelmed. It was a very difficult time for me. I had always been in quite corporate advertising roles, which means that I was always in roles where there was big structures around me, lots of big established teams and rules and processes. And what this job was asking me to do was to be very entrepreneurial, which at that time was a big shift for me. To be an entrepreneur is a very different set of skills. And they weren't skills that I had been trained in. So when I came to this business and realized that we had to make significant change without the corporate systems and big business structure that I had used all my career, I had to find a new way to do that. It took a whole new set of skills. And I knew that in order to do that, I had to find a way, a process, an approach that would, leverage the skills that I did have. And what I knew I could bring to the table was an approach that was led with empathy, that was led with human beings, which balanced what I say in the book, which is humanism with capitalism. And what that means is it balances our people with our need to make money. So I put that in place. It was difficult. It's difficult to do that at 100%, sort of from zero to hero, but it was the only way I knew how. And it did work. It wasn't just about our people inside the business. It was around our clients, our partners, suppliers that we worked with, putting people at the core, not just the beginning, but the absolute core of everything we did. And I had a deep belief that that would empower us to do all kinds of great things: better creative work, better business sense, better relationships, growth. And of course, in the end, my story has a happy ending, because it did do that. And we built a really great, small but thriving business and culture around that. We got to a point where we were winning every project we pitched for, and had very low staff turnover. So people were happy. And we formed a team that I think I will remember for the rest of my life. And I suspect they all will too. So it was a very special transformation journey.
Did you use that word empathy? Did you use the word empathy, or were you just and that's what at the start were people's reactions to, what are the specifics that you changed at the start or wanted to change that actually was a shift in culture for the people working at the organization?
I didn't use the word empathy in the beginning. And I think one of the secrets of empathy, when you want to encourage or share it with others, is to adapt it to the audience you're trying to reach. And I think that there are, empathy is quite academic still in the world, and it can be very intimidating. And if I had gone in shouting about empathy, I don't even know if I'd have kept my job. I don't think people could have handled it. I often talk about the fact that 15 months ago from where we are now, so we're talking today in March 2021, just November 2019, so just pre-COVID, there was no awareness of empathy in the corporate space, in the media. It wasn't a thing. And I always remember when I told my mum about publishing my book, she said, well, who's going to read it? I said, I actually don't know, Mum, but somebody has to, because this cannot carry on. We cannot carry on doing jobs that make us sick and talking about burnout like it's a normal reality, or understanding that suicide rates are rising in the world and affecting our children as well. So I knew that there had to be a change, but I also knew that nobody understood what empathy was, and that I had a significantly long journey ahead amongst other people like you, Ed, to teach the world, share with the world what it is. So in the beginning, I mainly talked about happiness for my team and kindness as an action, because I knew I was empathizing with them I knew that those words would be accessible and approachable and safe words for them. They wouldn't make them uncomfortable. And of course, you never want empathy to make anyone uncomfortable. So if you have to adapt that to your audience, that's what you need to do. So I spoke to them about us becoming the happiest team in Dubai, directly talking to what they needed as humans. They needed happiness in order to thrive, and that we would behave with kindness with our clients, with our suppliers, with our people. And it was only much later that I began to talk about empathy, and you know, given the ground that we'd created, then we could have the empathy discussion. If I did that job all over again tomorrow, I think I could talk about empathy far earlier on, because as I said, in 15 months the world has changed, and now people understand it, or at least, no, that's an overstatement. I don't think people understand it, but people are far more aware of it, far more open to it, and there's far higher recognition of it. So I think I would be able to use it more openly in 2021 than I could in 2018.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I've got, thinking back to my teaching career, I was trying to do similar things, but I never used the word empathy, and I didn't even know myself to call it empathy. But it's this drive to understand people, and I really like that point that you say about adapting to who you are talking to and who are your audience, because you know, you can talk about the greatest thing in the world, but if you can't get through the door to actually then spread the knowledge and actually grow it, you'll never get anywhere. And I think that's a really good point for maybe young people who are listening, who are thinking about, right, their empathy action projects and things that they want to do. Actually, right, it's not about you. It's about the people you're trying to serve or the people you're trying to help. Because you could have gone into the business and said, well, I want to do this, this, and this is going to make, and my life's fine. But actually you didn't. You said, what is going on with all of my colleagues? What is going on with my team? How do I do that? And your book, you wrote it so quickly. I mean, I've never written a book. Maybe I will one day, I don't know. But I remember reading it and it's like, I'm sat on the plane, or like that's where it started.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's weird to think now, just sitting on a plane at the moment. But what went through your mind writing this book? Because like you said, it's not like you had people urging you, like around you, your mum saying, you know, who's going to read it, but yet you went and did it anyway. Where did that come from? Where did that drive come from? And what are your thoughts about it, like during the process of writing it? What did you learn?
I think that it was a force inside me. I often say the book wrote me, because it is the most accurate way I can describe what happened. In that, when I did take on this role and I went through this with all of the people, like you said, that I was trying to serve a business and all the people within it, and the wider context of that, it was incredibly difficult for me as a person. You know, that was a very, very difficult journey. And I think the whole point of going through that was to discover what empathy is and how it can work. And then I just had to write it down. I had never thought about being an author. Never. I'd never thought about writing a book. In fact, I didn't even think about writing it when I was writing it. So like you said, I sat on a plane and I started to write. And when I was on that plane, I was on the way to Southeast Asia, which is a very sort of connected place for me. It's great for me as a human. I love it there. I spent some time on an Indonesian beach surrounded by the most wonderful people. I mean, I was alone, but you know, in the place that I was in. And I left 4 days later and got back on a plane, and I had 25,000 words, maybe 30,000 words written. And that gave me the confidence that I had enough to say, or that there was enough to say. Really, it was not really about me. It was more about, I guess, the words. And yeah, I mean, I think I always say that writing a book is far easier than editing a book, because I did write it very quickly. The whole thing was done in a month. But the editing, so when someone gives you feedback on your work and you then have to not change it, but rearrange it. I think that's, for me, what my editing experience was really about, was about rearranging stuff, which is kind of like filmmaking, right? You're moving frames, you're changing the grade, you're changing the speed of the music in order to make that piece of creative work the most impactful as it can be. And that's what editing is. It's about taking 60,000 words and all these chapters and having someone else look at it and say, really like what's in chapter 17, but I think it should be in chapter 6. And by the time I got to that phase, we were in lockdown. And that was horrendously hard for me, because I suspect, like you, as creatives, we thrive off energy, we thrive off humanity. And that's why I managed to write a book in a month, because I just surrounded myself with people, aeroplanes, beaches, malls, and the words just came. When I had to sit in a silent room, at 10 p.m. at night, without having left the house to get any inspiration or energy, editing was difficult. So that's probably what I learned. I really learned. I knew subconsciously, but I really learned what feeds me as a person. And for sure, that will impact my choices in the future of where I live, how I work, where I work, who I work with, because I learned a lot about myself in that process.
Yeah, I can definitely relate, and also cutting bits out that you think are so powerful, but they don't quite fit the narrative, or it just doesn't quite fit in, or it's just taken off in a different direction, and it's so difficult. I mean, some of the films this year, Habib's one, I had, I think, 5 hours of interview of him talking about his life, and almost every second is worthy of being in there. And yeah, it's 20 minutes, and I cheated because they're all meant to be 10 minutes, and I made it a 20-minute film. It's just, yeah, I can't imagine with words. It would drive me insane, editing and thinking about it. But like you said, creativity needs that space, and it's really interesting. There's a parallel, I think, with creativity and empathy, in the sense that this idea of creating space for it to happen, and being strict about that as well. It can happen quickly, and sometimes you get those sparks, but also, for me anyway, I have to really be in a certain mindset to be creative, and I can't be distracted by emails here and this and that. And I think empathy is the same. So you can't be distracted by all of these things that your to-do list if you are trying to be present with someone else and really understand them. How has your team, obviously you said they've developed and they've come on massively. What was like a really proud moment for you where you were actually not involved and you could almost see the actions and the things you've been trying to instill in your team come to fruition? So I don't know if that was a team member with a client, but you were kind of on the side watching. Do you remember a certain moment where you're like, okay, this is happening, and it's paying off? Do you remember that?
I do, and there's so many of them, because I think empathy is not it's not a turning point, it's a journey, right? So I think you begin to see it evolve in people all the time. But for sure, there were sort of key moments, particularly with, as you mentioned, the people that work with clients, when you see a shift in their understanding of them, and you hear perhaps one of the more senior members of staff saying to one of the more junior members of staff, I know your clients upset you, or that seems like really tough feedback, but tell me more about what's going on in their environment today. Why are they behaving like that? And then the junior member will say, well, I know they've got this big presentation with the CEO on Friday. And then the senior member will say, well, there we go, let's talk about that. Because actually, if you put yourself in the shoes of the client, you're not the problem here. There's 100 other things happening in his corporate or her corporate life. Her or his response to you and this thing that you've done in this 5 minutes of the day is most probably completely non-reflective of actually anything you've done or are doing. There's a far wider context to that human being's reality. And I think that the lockdown, again, there's been many bad things that COVID has inflicted on our world, but I have seen huge shifts in people in terms of their ability to reflect on others and the reality of others. And you've seen into people's homes, literally, like you and I have been on Zoom a lot in the last year, and I know your bedroom now, right? Like, or whichever room you're sitting in.
Here it is.
There it is.
I've actually tidied it up a little bit for this.
I actually noticed that over the last year. You've got more Zoom friendly.
I've been outed.
But you know what I mean? We know each other's lives a bit more. We can reflect on each other a bit more. So yeah, I think there has definitely been conversations that I can recall where I think, it's good to see.
Yeah, and I think, that there's my wardrobe behind me. I'm not I'm wearing a hoodie. I think I really like the way the world's moving, in the sense that, I think maybe 10 years ago, if this had happened, I should be wearing a shirt because I'm hosting a webinar. But actually, this is not what I wear. And yes, I do wear shirts sometimes, and I do like to get dressed up a bit more, or if I'm going to there are times to wear things more. But if I was to wear a shirt now on a webinar, I would feel a little bit, I don't know, like I'm not being my authentic self. And we've talked about authenticity, and maybe that's a great point to come on to, is empathy and leadership. And leadership is very much within your realm of what you do as well, and what you talk about. Why is it so important to be authentic? And how can you do that? Because for some people, it's really hard to be themselves. I admit it's very easy for me, because I am white and I'm male and I'm tall, and I always say I've won the lottery in terms of human life, or how humans see it, and it shouldn't be that way. But I understand the privileges that come with just the skin that I'm born in, and for other people it might be really, really hard. But how can you develop your authentic self and be confident to lead with your authentic self?
I think the easier answer is why. So let's start there. I mean, at its most simplest, because if you don't, people will know, especially the younger generation today, perhaps some of the people listening, because they're so exposed to media and social media all the time, like they can smell a rat, right? So inauthenticity is almost like a radar, like beep, beep, beep. You can hear it, you can see it, people know it, because these young people have grown up on social media. So they have followed the authentic and the inauthentic since almost 4, 5, 6 years old. So we're extremely smart at sussing that out. So why is because if you're not, people will know. And why does that matter? Because that just means you can't ever have true trust as human beings, right? If I know that this person is always fake, always has a veneer, always has a cover up, very difficult for me to ever be totally authentic, honest, or trusting of them, because I know it's not really them. And again, from a sociological point of view, our subconscious has been tuned over hundreds of years to know that as well. So why you need it is because you can never have a decent relationship if you don't have one. How to do it is, as you said, and it's incredibly tough. I think the only things that really you can advise on that is to find context in life where possible, and this can be very difficult, where you feel you can be yourself. Now, many people don't have this luxury, but if you can create that at home, if perhaps you don't have it at work, or maybe not in your school or your university, then find another space where you can be yourself, with a group of friends, with a community that you commit to, with a religious institution, with a a family unit. Create spaces in your world where you can be yourself, because that will build your confidence. And as your confidence grows, you can then take that true you to more and more spaces. And I think your films touch on this all the time, Ed, actually, which is this journey to find out who you are. And I also think it's poignant to say, and this may not be relevant to all people, but there is data and sort of evidence out there that it shows that it takes until our mid-30s to do it. So I also think you have to take pressure off yourself, because we live, if all goes well and we're healthy and lucky, we live long lives, and it takes a while to get to grips with that. And there is data that shows that by your mid-30s, it's a bit older for men actually, but you're just about working that out. And that means that's taken you, 35 years, which to your young listeners feels like forever, to find out who your authentic self is. And as I said, when I went through my book writing process and my last couple of roles, I have more and more become aware and happy and confident in what I need to be my authentic self. I do also just want to say that I think there is a link between authenticity and empathy as well, in that in order to truly empathize with other people, sometimes you have to adapt who your authentic self is to them in order for them to be able to connect with you. So, for example, if my true self is wearing shorts and t-shirts all the time, and I was going to go and do work in Saudi Arabia, I would have to cover up and wear something else that may not be my authentic self, but it's important for me to be able to connect and empathize with the people in the room. Because if I went in what was only truly authentic to me, it's so problematic to them that we wouldn't be able to connect as human beings. There would be far too high a barrier. So I do think that there is a balance for you, balancing your own authenticity with what your audience, team, community need to be able to offer their best version of them to you.
Yeah, mate, and an element of respect there as well, isn't there, for the culture? And I think that also comes on nicely to this idea that empathy doesn't mean you're agreeing with someone else. It actually can be about, it's just about understanding, you know, and giving time. And I think we live in a world where cancel culture has become a thing. And actually,
I've never heard that before.
You haven't heard of cancel culture?
No, it sounds like a terribly British thing to me, but awesome. Tell me about it.
You've been out of the UK too long. So cancel culture, someone tweets something that might be taken out of context, or it might have meant what they meant, and automatically everyone unfollows them, deletes them, calls for them to be, you know, banned from all social media, blah, 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 blah. And we could probably get into an interesting discussion about free speech and Donald Trump and all that sort of thing. But just for now, just this idea that actually I encourage people to follow people that they don't agree with necessarily on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, because it's very, for me, I don't know what your opinion on this is, but I feel like what we've seen, especially in the US elections over the past decade, that people follow only who their party is, what side they're on, are they red, are they blue? And all they hear then is that rhetoric, and all they hear is the negativities about the other party and the other group, whether it's, you know, Republicans or Democrats, and they only hear the positives about them. And then if someone says something negative about them, no, that can't be right. And there's no middle, there's no meeting in the middle, and you have to be one or the other. And for me, I see that as one of the most dangerous elements of the world that we're living in at the moment. But I wanted to, ask you, what do you think about that idea of, you know, unfollowing people or banning people from certain platforms? And where is the balance between free speech and not allowing hate speech?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't want to comment on Donald Trump or anything political from America, because I just don't have any of the data set. But what I do think is really interesting is your opinion here about, I like to encourage people to listen to people that maybe have different opinions from theirs. Because of course, empathy, the ability to understand, demands of us to connect and comprehend those that aren't like us. The key to that is listening. And I think the challenge to that, as I talk about so often, is that nobody teaches us to listen. So we teach our small children, you know, like with my little girl, listen to mummy, listen to your teacher, listen to daddy. But then we stop, you know, they sort of get, I don't know, a little bit older, 5, 6 perhaps. We stop teaching them how to listen because they become their own sort of personalities and humans in their own ways in the world. Certainly in high school, certainly in university, and definitely in the workplace. We then don't teach or remind each other how to listen to each other. And I think that is the fundamental challenge to this. It's all very well tuning into opinions that aren't your own or that differ from your own. But as you said, only really if you can do that from a state of listening, from a state of wanting to hear other opinions, so that you can be curious, you can inquire, and that you can, you know, attempt to understand, which is, again, of course, what Empathy Week is trying to do. And I heard a great example of this from another lady who loves what we're doing in empathy in the States. And she told me she recently met another mother who doesn't want to take the vaccine. This woman did, the other mum didn't. So she wanted to ask her, but she knew they were only connected on WhatsApp. And she knew if she said, "Why aren't you taking the vaccine?" that the other woman would read it like, "Why aren't you taking the vaccine?" But that wasn't what she meant. She really wanted to know. So she said she went to great lengths to write a message that explained, I want to ask you something, and it's really coming from a place where I want to understand. I'm really curious, and I would really appreciate it if you could share with me why you don't want to have the vaccine, because I would like to know what you think. And of course, that opened the door, and the woman openly shared all of her opinions. And that meant the first mum could be curious, could open her mind. She didn't agree with her. She's going to vaccinate her and her children. But at least now she has a more open, fully minded opinion, or ability, I should say, versus opinion, to understand what others unlike her think. So I agree with you, Ed, that I think we should encourage people to tune into others. But I also think that we have to work really hard and be quite careful that we're empowering young people with the skills to do that from a place of positivity and equity, because otherwise it can be difficult.
Yeah, such a difficult area to go about, because people say, well, you know, do you agree with this person? And then you do get into the politics of it. But absolutely, this idea of listening, and it's so easy to say, you know, practice listening. Well, we do that all the time, but actually, are you listening or are you hearing? You know, there's a difference between the two. Listening is, you know, and often we're formulating our responses in our head before that person's even finished speaking, which I think is what you're saying there with the woman texting the other woman. That woman will read it and automatically think that she's being attacked and will go on a defensive straight away rather than actually reading it in the right way. We're coming up last few minutes. What is your advice to people entering the working world for the first time, or thinking about what they want to do? So teenagers and students at university who are like, I think I want to do this, I'm not sure, or I have no idea, or maybe I really know what I want to do. But what is your advice to people that are going to enter the working world for the first time?
I think I would advise people to just be really curious, and to not be in a huge rush to try things. And I think it's really important to reach out and build a network around you, which is quite scary when you've not yet got one, or at least you've got one, but it's people like you. So it's other young people, other teenagers, that type of thing. People reach out to me a lot, young people, students or graduates, and say, you know, can you talk to me about this? Or could you help me with that? Or, you know, could I do an internship in this, or whatever it is? And I think you just have to put yourself out there. Now, it comes with a disclaimer that you will be disappointed, because many people won't reply and many people can't help or don't want to help. But if we don't put ourselves out there to find the people that do want to help, then you're not going anywhere. So some progress is better than none. And I always say, you know, what you don't start today, you can't manifest tomorrow. So take baby steps. Start talking to people, whether that's your parents' friends, your teachers' friends. You know, find people that you can ask and say, well, I really am interested in marketing, which is what I've done most of my career. Mum, do you know anyone in marketing? Or your teacher, your aunt, your granddad, anybody? Do you know anyone in marketing? Because that person will know, you know, another probably 100 people. And really, again, from someone that believes in empathy, but that is human currency for you. That is your evolution. Connect with people and they will help you find the way.
Yeah, amazing. And put yourself out. There is nothing, like you say, sometimes people are just busy, and it's not about, you can't take it personally. You don't know what someone's going on. But if you put yourself out there, and the tip that I was given is always, you know, read something that someone's done, or read a blog. It doesn't have to be a whole book, but read a blog or read a post or follow someone or learn about that person before just saying, oh, can you give me this? Because it shows a sign of respect. It's also a bit, you know, showing empathy as well to that person, that you've sought to understand them before getting in touch. But there's nothing, you know, there's nothing quite like a message from someone that says, look, I don't know where I am, I want to do this, blah, blah, blah. Because that, like you say, that person might not be able to help, but they'll know someone that can. So that's great advice. And I think that element of don't rush it. There's so much noise on social media about people doing this and that, and, you know, becoming a millionaire by 22, and, you know, God, I watch like international, you know, football games and basketball, whatever, and now I'm saying, yeah, this kid's 90. I'm like, oh my gosh, what have I done with my life? Why could I have not been an international athlete? And I'm 10 years older than that now. You know, so it's you're in your own lane, you're in your own game. Focus on yourself and develop yourself, I think, is such a great piece of advice. Mimi, what's next?
I want to just sorry, just very quickly just say on that, so as someone who gets, again, like you, I'm sure, but lots of people reach out to me, I just want to say how important that point that Ed just said is. When people reach out to me on LinkedIn and ask me, what do you do? I'm very defensive because I think if you're going to reach out to me and you want to make a connection, you're coming to me, at least click on my profile. It says author, right? So I think that is such important advice. Do a little bit of research. Do not copy and paste the same thing to 100 people, because as I said earlier, when we come back to authenticity, people know if you are authentic and interested, you don't have to know loads. You're going to get a far higher response rate, than if you are not. So I just wanted to agree with you, Ed, and say it's so, so important.
Yeah, absolutely. What's next for you, Mimi? Book down, taking over the world. What is next?
No, definitely not taking over the world. What's next for me is I'm writing another book and creating lots of content. So, I mean, what's next for me as we carry on? I think this is an extremely long journey for all of us in this space. And what fuels me is every little piece of progress. So I said that in one of my emails recently. You know, everyone talks about big goals and dreams and all these things. But for me, every day that I make a little bit more progress, like this conversation today, and feel that we're putting something out in the world that might help someone, that carries me forward. So what's next is to write the second book, to carry on creating content, to carry on talking all around the world and doing workshops. And yeah, for anyone listening, please reach out, please follow me, please help me spread that message. And I do reply to 100% of my messages. So if you want to reach out, do, and I'll be happy to share anything that, you know, people need in order to do their next thing.
Perfect. And as you've just put your foot in it and said you replied to 100% of messages, what's your handle? How can people reach out to you?
I do, Ed. I definitely do. My handles are at Mimi Nicklin. So that's on Twitter or Instagram. I'm at Mimi Nicklin on LinkedIn as well. So you can find me there. My website is also, funnily enough, Mimi Nicklin. And my book is Softening the Edge. And if you're in the UK, that's in all good bookstores and amazon.co.uk. There it is. But it's on Amazon all over the world. So wherever you're listening from, pop on there and search for it and you will find it.
Amazing. Mimi, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for sharing gems of knowledge. You will see Mimi all over your screens in future years to come and currently as well. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, and thank you for people watching, listening, and see you soon.
See you soon.
Cheers,
Thank
Mimi.
you very much. Bye.
Bye.